And to discuss all the latest in politics, we're joined now by Paula Matthewson, political analyst at the New Daily. Paula, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
It's only Monday, but at least we haven't lost any more candidates as we did last week. I think the count was up to 11 or 12 or something ridiculous like that.
Yes, well, there might be a few more that Clive Palmer's party will lose, considering that they haven't been
filling out their forms.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, on citizenship.
So, yes, we'll see. I think there's still 2 weeks to go. We probably will see a few more heads roll, I suspect.
The third debate is finalised now for Wednesday night at the National Press Club. Do people pay attention to the debates?
No. No, they don't. I suspect more people will pay attention to this third debate, given that the ABC is broadcasting it and I understand sharing it with other networks. But the one that took place on pay TV station on Friday night got 43,000 viewers. I'm not sure about the other ones. So it's really only the journalists and the rusted-on supporters that follow the debates. It's more the media follow-up afterwards, such as the Space Invader
the remark, yes,
that we had at the debate last Friday night. That got a lot more coverage than anything else that would have taken place.
How much do moments like that Space Invader kind of moment that took place, the declaration by the studio audience of who the winner is? We saw the Seven West debate, the first one in Perth, the second one in Brisbane, both coming down on the side of Bill Shorten. How much does that add to the momentum of either campaign?
Purely only within the supporter base and the staff, I think.
So the converted?
Yes, the converted. So, I mean, that's the whole point of the launches as well, really, is to rally the troops. So, yes, it was interesting to see that particular event take place, the Space Invader event, and I must admit that my hackles did rise as I saw Scott Morrison move into Bill Shorten's
very reminiscent of
space.
Another moment.
Well, that's right, and I remember the day that Mark Latham did something similar in pulling in John Howard with the handshake. There was obviously some differences in that Bill Shorten stepped forward before he accused the Prime Minister of being a space invader. But there are those atmospherics. People see those in a news grab or in a newspaper, but it doesn't really change much at the end of the day.
Bill Shorten will be on Q&A tonight as the sole guest. Scott Morrison has said he won't appear on Q&A during the election campaign. Is that a clever move on his part, or is it unwise, given that he hasn't appeared on the program for many years?
I think it's an interesting move in that what it says about the Prime Minister. Initially, when Bill Shorten and his campaign team were resisting the debates, I saw that as a sign that that the Labor team were concerned that Shorten had made a couple of stumbles and that he might be pressured to do that again. So, it's all about risk management, and what this shows, the fact that the Prime Minister won't go on Q&A, it shows that it's been deemed a risk, because as we know, Q&A can provide a question that's totally out of left field, and it might throw the Prime Minister off, and that's something that he doesn't need at this point.
We're seeing, opinion polls continue to roll out, the news poll, Ipsos poll rolling out in the last 24 hours. There doesn't seem, over a period of time, to be really much going on in terms of that gap. I mean, we're still within the margin of error. It's still very, very close, isn't it?
It is close, and I think it's come as a surprise to some people. But the fact is that at most elections, the parties do converge, the major parties do converge, and that is emphasised by the fact that when we look at opinion polls, that they're measured in terms of the two-party preferred. So that has closed over time, but what is hidden within that closing two-party preferred is that the primary vote of the major parties has dropped. So Labor and the Liberal and the Coalition are still only polling in mid to high 30s. And certainly the Coalition needs to be polling at least 40, if not more, to be able to win.
And staying on those poll numbers, they continue to show that Bill Shorten is not very likeable. He's had to answer questions about that, including on Sunrise this morning. How big a factor is Bill Shorten's likeability?
I don't think likeability is an issue, it's trustworthiness that is the issue. So if, people may know that I once worked for John Howard, it was a long time ago. Voters still often voted for John Howard, even though they didn't like him, because they trusted him to run the economy in the interests of the whole Australian community. And I think so, looking at that now, voters are thinking about who do I trust, not so much who do I like amongst the two. I don't think they necessarily like either of them. But at the moment, it seems as if they're perhaps trusting Scott Morrison to run the economy better.
I asked that question because of the appearance of Chloe Shorten at the Labor launch yesterday, that some analysts were suggesting that her appearance, her introduction for her husband, was to make him more to humanise him more, to make him more likeable to prospective voters.
People have such short memories. I recall Kevin Rudd's wife, Therese, doing a similar introduction, and Kevin Rudd certainly didn't need to have his popularity levels increased by his wife introducing him. And still, I mean, it's part of the campaign. It's just painting the picture for voters about the people that they are being asked to elect.
On this question of trust, if trust is such an issue in terms of, who is more votable, electable, how do you explain momentum behind UAP and Clive Palmer?
Well, that's because disengaged voters don't trust either of the major parties. And so Clive Palmer...
even with all his baggage, they will go...
Well, that's right. So he's been able to make that connection. These minor party candidates, these personality party candidates, make a connection with voters in that it's an instinctive thing that... They say the sorts of things. I mean, Pauline Hanson's line is, I say what you're
thinking.
What you're thinking. I'm brave enough to say what you're thinking, and it's they don't actually think it through very much, but it connects with them.
You've done a bit of analysis on Clive Palmer's prospects of winning government, which he has said over and over again. What are your thoughts in the next 12 days of how that's going to play out? As we know, he's already headed to the High Court to try to say that, the preferences shouldn't be announced until after 9:30 p.m, until the polls have closed in the Cocos Islands.
That's an extraordinary move. Palmer took out full-page newspaper ads saying that his party was on track to win government, saying that there was a 15% vote around the country already for his party, and that the 20% undecided vote would all vote for his party, which is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. But the fact is, with these personality politicians, the disengaged people that support them or are listening to them, they don't have enough time to think this through, to understand whether there's any factual basis behind it. And this High Court, requesting the High Court to to instruct the Electoral Commission not to announce the two-party preferred or even any of the polling results until 9:30 is
so
just another way of getting publicity. I can't see how announcing what a two-party preferred vote in a seat on the East Coast is going to affect voters
in the
who still haven't got to the polling booth in Western Australia or the Northern Territory or the Cocos Islands.
What if there is a hung parliament, as some are now suggesting, with just 2 weeks to go and those polls sort of not moving much? What role will Clive Palmer's party play if there's a hung parliament?
Well, I suspect that the only person from his party that will get elected is him in the Senate. So it will come down to what the crossbench looks like in the Senate. And Clive Palmer has proven in the past to be a deal maker. There's really no rhyme or reason or consistency to the types of deals that he's done when he was formerly in the Parliament and did crossbench deals. But the Senate is going to be troublesome for whoever wins government, because there is going to be that crossbench, and to an extent it is a conservative crossbench. So whether Labor or the Coalition wins, they're going to have to be doing deals with that Conservative crossbench. Your analysis in the New Daily says that voters are, in your words, now at the stage of wanting the nightmare of the campaign to be over. And we're seeing that feeling play out in the numbers of people who are turning up to the pre-polls. They're already casting their votes, even though there's 12 days left in this campaign. So pre-polls opened on the 29th, so a week ago. We've already had double the amount of people who voted by this time at the 2016 election. Now, it's hard to read into that what it might mean in terms of being favourable to the Coalition or to Labor. Analysis that's been done in the past suggests that people who are older tend to vote early and people who favour the Coalition vote early, but only just over 50%. But So what we are finding is there's more and more people that have just had enough. They just are switching off. They're not paying attention. They just want to cast their vote and then ignore the next 2 weeks of the campaign.
So how then do candidates continue to campaign?
Well, this is proving to be the tricky question for the campaigners. That's why Labor reportedly had their campaign launch a week earlier to catch some of those people. But it's more about making sure that the pre-poll booths are manned with people giving out how to vote cards. And you may note in the newspapers, there's a lot of supporters of parties who are doing this job complaining about having to stand around all day and do this. They obviously don't work in retail because they're complaining about having to stand for a few hours a day handing out how to vote cards.
Meanwhile, the Coalition's launch happens this Sunday, the 12th of May, Mother's Day, which some people are kind of a bit irked about.
Well, this has set a precedent in so many ways for imposing an election campaign over the top of school holidays, Easter, Anzac Day and now Mother's Day. So in the wash-up afterwards, we'll probably look at all of that and see whether that was a wise thing or not.
Right.
And what about Paul Keating's foray into the debate about Australia's security agencies, labelling the chiefs of those agencies nutters in relation to China? How damaging is that for Labor?
I don't think it will be particularly damaging. For those of us who've been following politics for a really long time, it's fascinating to see how Paul Keating has changed from the bête noire to this rock star that not just Labor supporters, but lots of Australian voters look at very favourably. So his persona, his perceived persona, has really changed over time. And I think, as Bill Shorten said today, he's got opinions and he'll share them. So I imagine that people have been forgiving of Paul Keating and his LAW tax cuts and his 18% interest rates and all the other things that some of us may remember him for, and want to humour him now because he's this rock star ex-politician.
What particular vulnerabilities do you see in the next 12 days of this campaign? I mean, I'm thinking about issues such as, climate change and the Adani mine, the water buyback scandal. These are things that, to me, seem somewhat unresolved in terms of how they're being tackled by the two major leaders.
Both sides are at the point now where they just want the narrative to be about the things that they want to talk about, which is why you've got...
explain Bill Shorten going to hospitals.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and he just wants to talk about health and fairness and funding for hospitals and childcare workers and the like, whereas Scott Morrison wants to talk about the economy, as he was doing on 7:30 just earlier, and saying to pay for all these things that the Labor Party is promising, you've got to have a strong economy providing the taxes so that you can pay for this stuff. So I think there'll just be more of the same, and the problem is that, again, people will just switch off. Certainly when the side starts throwing these numbers around, oh, that's 77 billion and this is 148 million, and people just go, their eyes glaze over. They just don't really want to know about this battle of numbers, particularly when Labor supporters don't care. I don't think they actually care how much this is going to cost. they're just happy, thrilled that the Labor Party is going to be funding all of these things, these policies that are really needed. Whereas the coalition supporters just want the government to keep the economy strong. So I think we just need to look out for a little surprise thing that might be coming out, just as it did during the New South Wales election. I'm sure both sides have still got little pieces
The dirt
of
units are not done.
dirt to deliver.
And that'll come in the final week, you think?
I imagine so.
Yeah.
All right, Paula Matthewson, good to talk to you as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.